Welcome. Today we're embarking on an intensive exploration of the source materials around the life and the career of one of the most iconic and just electrifying voices in the history of rock and roll.
Janis Joplin.
Exactly.
And we are looking at a really extraordinary period in music history. I mean, her career professionally, it spanned barely 4 years, from 1966 to her death in 1970.
Just 4 years.
In that tiny window, Janis Joplin she became the definition of the powerful blues-soaked female rock vocalist. That electric stage presence, that raw mezzo-soprano voice, it was instantly recognizable.
Our mission today is to move beyond just the legend, the rebellious rocker cliche. We want to extract the real facts, the deepest insights, and some of the surprising psychological details that shaped her short, explosive life.
Right, we're tracing her path from being a severely ostracized teenager in Port Arthur, Texas, to becoming this cultural phenomenon.
A phenomenon whose influence is still, it's still felt so strongly today.
Oh, absolutely. And that influence is measurable. The source material confirms it. RIAA certifications show she sold 18.5 million albums. That level of success decades later, it shows her music really transcended the chaotic time she lived in.
It really did. And when you look at the timeline of her rise, you have to focus on two immediate peaks. First, that moment of revelation at the Monterey Pop Festival, which just blew the doors open for her.
It introduced her to the world.
It did. And then the back-to-back commercial triumphs of the album Cheap Thrills, and of course the posthumous chart topper, Pearl.
And you can't forget the singles. The records show 5 of them reached the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, and that's all capped by her career-defining cover of Me and Bobby McGee.
Which, of course, hit #1 posthumously in March of 1971.
A huge, huge hit.
But before all that fame, there was the pain. To really understand the voice, you have to first understand the environment that produced the misfit.
Exactly.
So let's unpack her origins. We'll start with her formative years in Texas from 1943 up through 1965.
Okay, so we begin in Port Arthur, Texas. Janis Lynn Joplin was born there on January 19th, 1943. Her background, it was solid middle class. Her mother, Dorothy, was a registrar at a business college.
And her father, Seth, was an engineer at Texaco. She had 2 younger siblings, Laura and Michael.
And the accounts from her family are very telling, even from early childhood. They observed that Janis, she required significantly more emotional attention than her 2 younger siblings.
Right. It hints at this deep-seated need for affirmation, for acceptance, that she seems to have carried with her throughout her entire life.
And that the emotional context is just vital when we look at her high school experience at Thomas Jefferson High.
Which was, by all accounts, just awful.
It was intensely traumatic. The source material confirms she wasn't just ignored, she was actively and severely ostracized, subjected to relentless, painful bullying.
The names they called her were just vicious. They speak to that kind of teenage cruelty, that need for conformity. She was called pig, freak, and creep.
And it's so important to stay with this for a moment because this trauma really became the foundation for her later stage persona.
Right. She reflected on it herself. There's a quote that just encapsulates her early rebellion. She said, "I was a misfit. I read, I painted, I thought. I didn't hate black people."
And that statement is so critical. It shows her alienation wasn't just physical or social, it was intellectual, it was moral.
Port Arthur in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Reading, painting, critical thought, those were seen as eccentric.
And her refusal to conform to the prevailing segregationist attitudes, that set her apart even further. She was positioning herself as this sensitive thinking outsider against a backdrop of what she saw as provincialism and narrow-mindedness.
And on top of all that social rejection, she had physical struggles.
Yes.
As a teen, she was overweight and she suffered from severe acne.
Which left deep scars that, later required dermabrasion. These factors just reinforced her perception of herself as ugly or unacceptable, and it fueled this desperate need she had to escape and reinvent herself.
The music was that escape.
It was. She found solace by connecting with other high school outcasts, and this group introduced her to the records of true blues legends.
Bessie Smith, Mal Rainey.
Lead Belly. Joplin herself credited these artists as the seminal influences that directly led to her decision to become a professional singer. She heard their pain and their power, and she recognized her own voice in it.
She did try to follow a more traditional path at first. She attended Lamar State College and then the University of Texas at Austin. But while she was at UT, her musical identity really started to solidify.
Yeah, she performed with a folk trio, the Waller Creek Boys, and she was already known for having this incredibly strong booming voice. She was also cultivating that bohemian identity that would define her career.
She was rebellious.
Absolutely. Modeling her appearance and her defiance partly on her blues heroines and partly on the beat poets she admired.
The campus paper at the time, the Daily Texan, they noticed this nonconformity. In 1962, they published a profile on her with the headline, "She Dares to be Different."
And it details how she went barefoot, she wore Levi's when that was still unusual for women on campus, and she always carried her auto harp, that small zither-like instrument. She was ready to break into song anywhere.
It paints a picture of a true eccentric.
It does. And it was during this time, December of '62, that her first known recording was captured. It wasn't in a professional studio or anything.
No, it was just on tape at a fellow student's house.
Right. The blues standard, what good can drink and do. And even in that informal setting, you can hear the raw material of the legend she was about to become.
This divergence, musically and culturally, it just made Texas unsustainable for her. In January 1963, she sought true liberation. She hitchhiked with her friend Chet Helms to San Francisco.
And she explicitly said she needed to leave because her head was in a much different place.
This is the beginning of that first San Francisco stint, a period where she found artistic freedom, but also she spiraled.
She did. She spiraled into the high cost of that counterculture lifestyle. Artistically, though, we get a fantastic artifact from this time, the typewriter tape from 1964.
That session is legendary. It was recorded with Jorma Kaukonen, who would go on to be the guitarist for Jefferson Airplane. It's got 7 blues standards, like Trouble in Mind.
But the name, the typewriter tape, comes from the background noise. You can clearly hear Kaukonen's wife, Margareta, using a typewriter while they're playing.
It's a perfect sonic snapshot of that chaotic, impromptu, early 60s San Francisco folk scene.
But the personal cost was immediate and brutal. The notes show her substance use just escalated during this period. She was arrested for shoplifting in '63.
And more gravely, she gained a swift reputation in the Haight-Ashbury scene as a speed freak and an occasional heroin user.
All alongside being a heavy and very visible drinker, Southern comfort was already her favorite.
The deterioration was just incredibly rapid. The biographical accounts, they paint a very grim picture. By May of 1965, her friends recognized the situation had become life-threatening.
The regular injection of methamphetamine had left her, and this is a quote, skeletal and emaciated.
She was suffering from acute addiction and malnourishment.
Her friends staged an intervention. They pooled their money to get her a bus fare home to Port Arthur, and the sheer gravity of her condition is underscored by her recorded weight at the time.
A fragile 88 pounds.
Just 40 kilograms. This was a near-fatal crisis, forcing her back to the very place she had so desperately tried to escape just 2 years earlier.
It must have been a devastating shock for her family to see her return in that state. And what the sources reveal next is this sincere attempt she makes at normalcy between 1965 and '66.
It was a genuine pivot. Back in Port Arthur, she stopped all drug and alcohol use. She completely changed her appearance. She adopted a beehive hairdo. She even enrolled at Lamar University, majoring in anthropology and social work.
And she was briefly engaged to a man named Peter DeBlanc, who worked for IBM, though that engagement ended pretty quickly.
This period of attempted recovery is so crucial because it highlights the central psychological conflict of her entire life. She was commuting to Beaumont for regular counseling sessions.
With a psychiatric social worker named Bernard Geritano.
Exactly. And she was specifically trying to figure out how to pursue her art, her passion, without returning to the destructive, drug-fueled life she had just fled.
Geritano's notes offer this profound insight into her anxiety. She was absolutely terrified of relapsing.
But she was just as terrified of becoming trapped in the predictable, stifling life she associated with Port Arthur. She worried that if she didn't sing professionally, her life would become being a key punch operator or a secretary or just a wife and mother.
Lifestyle she explicitly wanted to avoid. So she had this terrible paradox. The only path that felt authentic to her was the same path that nearly killed her.
And Geritano tried to reassure her. He worked to dismantle this mythology that had developed around her, this idea that drugs were a necessary component of artistic success.
He emphasized that narcotics were not essential for her to reach her goals. He was trying to decouple her immense talent from her self-destructive coping mechanisms.
But that tension, that desire for artistic truth, battling the fear of the mundane and the terror of addiction, it defined her story.
And ultimately, it was the music that won. In 1966, the call came to return to San Francisco, which signaled the start of her short, meteoric rise.
Indeed. And this brings us directly to part two, the years with Big Brother and the holding company and that explosion into instant stardom.
That initial connection was so vital. Chet Helms, the friend she had originally hitchhiked with to San Francisco, he was the one who recruited her back in '66.
Specifically to front Big Brother and the holding company, a band that was already building steam in the psychedelic rock scene. She officially joined them on June 4th, 1966.
And her powerful, raw, bluesy vocal style was exactly what they were missing. She injected immediate soul into their psychedelic jamming, creating this unique sound that just perfectly captured the countercultural moment.
What's fascinating, connecting back to her intervention just a year before, is that the accounts say Joplin came back to San Francisco determined to stay sober, at least initially.
There's a powerful anecdote about this early resolve, isn't there?
Yes, the story involving Travis Rivers, who she shared an apartment with. She made him promise, absolutely promise, no needles would be allowed in their apartment.
And when his guests violated that,
Joplin went nuts, screaming and crying. She couldn't bear to see it. It shows how raw her terror of relapse still was.
it's a heartbreaking detail. It just shows the fragility of her sobriety when she was surrounded by the chaos of Haight-Ashbury. But that internal battle was, for a moment, overshadowed by external validation.
The first great leap forward. June 1967, the Monterey Pop Festival.
Monterey was everything. Before that, Big Brother was relatively unknown outside the Bay Area.
And their appearance there, with Joplin's electrifying stage presence and voice, it just catapulted them into national, even international prominence overnight.
The moment of her ascent was captured on camera. The documentary film, Monterey Pop, released shortly after, provided the visual and auditory proof of her star power. It launched her as a singular talent, almost separate from the band itself.
And following the festival, they released their debut album, Big Brother and the Holding Company, in August of '67. And when the band signed with Columbia Records, the label knew where the star power was.
They re-released the album with a prominent label right on the cover, featuring Janis Joplin.
Right. And this album gave them minor hits like Down on Me, a traditional song she arranged, and Bye Bye Baby.
But the stage was set for the defining album of the Big Brother era, which came out a year later. We are talking, of course, about Cheap Thrills.
Released in August 1968, Cheap Thrills was just an undeniable commercial triumph. It shot to #1 on the Billboard 200 and held that spot for 8 non-consecutive weeks.
This was the album that cemented her status as a global star. It remains one of the seminal records of the whole psychedelic era.
And it's celebrated for its raw live energy, which is surprisingly deceptive. The source materials confirm almost all the tracks were actually recorded in the studio.
With the notable exception of that intense performance of Ball and Chain, which truly was recorded live in front of an audience.
The producers knew what they were doing. They were acutely aware of the energy they needed to capture, so they made a conscious decision to maintain that raw, untamed feel. They even used incidental sounds.
There's that magnificent detail about the track Turtle Blues.
Yes. If you listen closely, you can actually hear the sound of a drinking glass breaking and the shards being swept away. They didn't edit it out. They left it in to preserve the atmosphere.
That detail perfectly encapsulates the chaotic energies surrounding her career. And of course, Cheap Thrills gave the world those major, lasting hits. Piece of My Heart and her haunting, powerful rendition of Summertime.
But despite this immense success, the partnership with Big Brother was inherently unstable. By late 1968, Joplin decided to leave.
Her reasoning was straightforward. She wanted control. She felt the band's musical limitations were holding her back, and she desired a more polished, nuanced sound that could truly showcase her vocal range and power.
Which launched her into her solo pursuit. This ushered in the era of the Cosmic Blues Band, and a period marked by both immense creative freedom and, well, paralyzing public turmoil.
The Cosmic Blues Band was a very deliberate artistic pivot away from Big Brother's psychedelic jamming.
Deeply influenced by the tight arrangements and powerful brass of the Stax Volt R&B and soul acts. This meant a full horn section, a much tighter, funkier soul sound.
It required a different level of musicianship. The new band included keyboardist Steven Ryder and saxophonist Cornelius Snooky Flowers.
Their first album, I Got Dem Ol' Cosmic Blues Again Mama, was released in September 1969. It was certified gold pretty quickly, showing her continued commercial pull, even with a radically different sound.
And there's a crucial detail from the production of this album that speaks to her ongoing internal struggle. The producer, Gabriel Meckler, He played an active role in keeping her strictly clean from drugs and drug-using friends during the recording sessions.
Which illustrates this ongoing dependency she had on external forces, producers, partners, to maintain her stability. When she was focused and supported, she could produce a certified gold album. But the moment that external structure faltered, so did her control.
And the critics, who were already so possessive of the Queen of Psychedelic Rock title she'd earned with Big Brother, they reacted strongly. The reviews were mixed, really polarizing.
Ralph J. Gleason, a prominent critic, was notably negative. He called the new band a drag and dramatically suggested she scrap them and go back to Big Brother.
Yet, others saw the brilliance of the transition. Carl Bernstein, reporting for the Washington Post, offered a strong counterpoint. He praised her magic and called the Cosmic Blues Band first-rate musicians, whose polished abilities genuinely complemented her incredible voice.
Commercially, they saw success. The single Cosmic Blues peaked at number 41, and a live version of Raise Your Hand was a top 10 hit in Germany. But as the fame grew, so did the external pressure and the public visibility of her internal struggle.
And that tension came to a dramatic head at Woodstock in August 1969.
She was scheduled to perform late on Sunday morning, August 17th. She arrived by helicopter with Joan Baez. The accounts describe her immediate reaction to seeing that colossal crowd. She became instantly, visibly nervous and giddy.
And the scheduling chaos just compounded her nerves and proved disastrous for her sobriety. She was forced to wait for 10 hours backstage because of delays.
And during that long, anxious wait, she relapsed. The source material confirms she spent time shooting heroin and drinking alcohol with her friend Peggy Caserta in a tent.
This context is so vital when you assess her performance. Pete Townsend of The Who watched her set, he later said she'd been amazing at Monterey, but at Woodstock, she wasn't at her best.
He attributed it directly to the long delay and the substances she'd consumed. But even Townsend concluded, but even Janis on an off night was incredible. The audience certainly thought so. They demanded an encore.
But Joplin herself was deeply unhappy with her singing that night. She insisted her performance be excluded from the original documentary film and the soundtrack album. Her self-criticism was just so intense.
And the scrutiny only intensified off stage. In November 1969, she was arrested in Tampa, Florida for shouting, "Don't fuck with those people," at police officers who were doing crowd control.
She was found guilty of using vulgar and indecent language and fined $200. Her defiant persona was now attracting legal consequences.
And perhaps the most heartbreaking account of her public deterioration comes from her publicist turned biographer, Myra Friedman. She witnessed a performance with Tina Turner at Madison Square Garden.
Friedman described Joplin as so drunk, so stoned, so out of control that she could have been an institutionalized psychotic rent by mania.
And Joplin was keenly aware of how audiences responded to her volatility. She admitted that when she performed for large crowds, she could feel them watching her with this constant question in their eyes. Is she going to make it?
This constant pressure led to the inevitable breakup of the Cosmic Blues Band by the end of '69. And before her final project, she attempted one last pivot towards stability.
Her retreat to Brazil in February 1970 with her friend Linda Gravenites. Significantly, the sources confirm that during this vacation, she successfully stopped using both drugs and alcohol.
And she found a moment of genuine connection there. She was romanced by an American tourist named David Niehaus, who was specifically characterized as being not into drugs.
There are these descriptions of them looking like a carefree, happy, healthy young couple. She even told Rolling Stone she was thinking of going into the jungle with a big bear of a beatnik.
But this stability was desperately fleeting. As soon as she returned to the United States, she relapsed into heroin use. And the relationship with Niehaus, who represented that clean, stable life, it ended abruptly when he saw her shooting drugs at her home.
With her personal life unraveling again, she focused fiercely on her art. She formed her final touring unit, the Full Tilt Boogie Band, mostly Canadian musicians, and notably no horn section this time.
She was determined this group would be different. She took a much more active role in its construction, famously declaring, "It's my band, finally it's my band."
And this sense of ownership led directly into the recording sessions for Pearl in Los Angeles in the summer of 1970 with producer Paul A. Rothchild.
Her last public show was on August 12, 1970, at Harvard Stadium.
And just 2 days later, she attended her 10-year high school reunion back in Port Arthur,
which the sources describe as a deeply unhappy experience. Despite being a global superstar, the trip was just defined by pain and bitterness. She spent the time denigrating Port Arthur and verbally attacking the classmates who had humiliated her.
It was an attempted, but ultimately unsatisfying, revenge. A final confrontation with the misfit she still felt haunted by.
The sessions for Pearl continued in L.A. This was the album that would define her legacy.
And it featured deeply personal tracks like Move Over, which she wrote about how men treated women, and of course the classic Me and Bobby McGee.
One of the most compelling details from these final sessions involves the cappella song Mercedes-Benz.
The lyrics were co-written with Bob Newirth in a bar, jotted down on napkins, and she recorded the entire song, vocals only, in a single take on October 1st, 1970.
Just effortless mastery.
Which makes what happens next so much harder to reconcile. 2 days later, on October 3rd, she visited the studio for what would be her final time. She listened to the instrumental track for Buried Alive in the Blues.
She was scheduled to record the vocals for that track the very next day.
She never made it back to the studio.
And before we get to the conclusion, we have to mention one final striking act of kindness that occurred during this time. On August 7, 1970, Joplin jointly paid for a tombstone for her hero, the blues singer Bessie Smith, whose grave had been unmarked since 1937.
It connects the modern queen of rock directly back to the blues pioneers who inspired her. A deep historical reverence, contrasting so sharply with the personal chaos surrounding her.
Now we turn to the tragic conclusion of her story in October 1970.
At the time of her death, Janis was staying at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood. She had become briefly engaged to Seth Morgan, a 21-year-old UC Berkeley student who was also known to be a cocaine dealer.
And we have a clear window into her fragile emotional state that final weekend. On the Saturday before her death, staff at the recording studio overheard her expressing intense anger after she discovered that Morgan had invited other women to her home.
The betrayal was clearly agonizing, but the real sting of abandonment seems to have come on Friday, October 2nd. She had been expecting both Morgan and her close friend Peggy Caserta to spend time with her that night.
And neither of them showed up.
The notes reveal she expressed profound sadness over this abandonment to her drug dealer. She was truly isolated.
The isolation and disappointment were just acute. On Sunday evening, October 4, 1970, her road manager, John Byrne Cook, found her dead on the floor of her room. And in discussing this moment, we should acknowledge the profound tragedy of a young life lost to a battle she had fought so publicly and privately since she was a teenager.
The official autopsy was conducted by Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who determined the cause of death to be a heroin overdose, possibly compounded by alcohol. The death was officially ruled accidental.
However, the immediate circumstances led to some confusion. Initial newspaper reports said no drugs or paraphernalia were present in the room when she was discovered.
That narrative was later challenged by Noguchi himself. His book claims a friend of Joplin's removed narcotics evidence from the scene, but later returned it when they realized an autopsy would reveal the drug use regardless.
Her road manager, John Byrne Cook, who found her, he had a strong suspicion. He believed the heroin she had acquired was far more potent than what she was used to.
And that suspicion gained a lot of traction because the accounts show that several of her dealer's other customers also suffered fatal overdoses that same weekend. It suggests a batch of unusual strength was out on the street.
There was also an alternative claim about the actual mechanism of death put forward by Peggy Caserta.
Caserta later insisted Joplin's death was caused by a head gash she suffered when her sandal caught in the shag carpet, causing her to fall. But even she conceded that the drugs and alcohol played a role in hastening her death.
Regardless of the exact sequence, the underlying cause was the addiction that had haunted her for years. After her death, she was cremated, and her ashes were scattered into the Pacific Ocean.
Her passing at 27, just 16 days after Jimi Hendrix, and a month after Alan Wilson of Canned Heat, both also 27, it contributed profoundly to the tragic lore of the 27 Club.
The tragedy is amplified when we look at the complexity of her personal life and legacy, which were as intense and defiant as her music.
Her relationships were varied and significant. The sources confirm romantic connections with both men like Chris Christopherson and Country Joe McDonald, and women like Jay Whittaker and Peggy Caserta.
And her defiance extended to how she addressed her fluid sexuality. We have that striking quote she gave her road manager, telling him to spread the word. Janis says she's gotten it on with a couple of thousand cats in her life and a few hundred chicks and see what they can do with that.
An extraordinary statement for the time. A radical declaration of sexual freedom that cemented her image as a true cultural iconoclast.
She was also a pioneer when it came to body modification. Her visible tattoos, That wristlet and the small heart on her breast done by Lyle Tuttle marked an early moment in pop culture's acceptance of tattoos as an art form.
Posthumously, the attempts to capture her essence became a cottage industry. Her publicist, Myra Friedman, published Buried Alive in 1973. Later, her sister Laura Joplin provided a more intimate perspective with Love, Janis.
But the publication that caused the most immediate scandal was Peggy Caserta's 1973 memoir, Going Down with Janis.
That book drew massive sensational attention for its graphic descriptions of drug use and sexual acts. The level of detail was shocking, even for the early 70s.
So much so that Caserta later repudiated the work, claiming it was the pornographic fantasy of her co-author. She tried to set the record straight decades later in 2018 with her book, I Ran Into Some Trouble.
But the fallout from that first memoir was dangerously real. The book angered her Los Angeles heroin dealer, who then sought violent revenge. He couldn't find Caserta, so he targeted a mutual friend, Kim Chappell, who was stabbed 3 times in the chest.
She survived, thankfully, but it just demonstrates the volatility that followed Joplin's death. Her narrative also translated to the screen, of course. The 1979 film The Rose, starring Bette Midler, was loosely inspired by her life.
And she inspired notable songs. Leonard Cohen's Chelsea Hotel #2 details an encounter with her, and Jerry Garcia's Bird Song was also written about her, with the lyricist saying it was about Joplin and the end of her suffering through death.
Her official recognition has just continued to grow. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '95, a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2005. In 2010, NPR officially dubbed her the Queen of Rock, and Rolling Stone's 2023 list placed her at number 78 on the 200 greatest singers of all time, an undeniable acknowledgement of her vocal impact.
And that impact is still cited by contemporary artists. The singer Pink, for instance, noted Joplin as a major inspiration for singing blues when it wasn't culturally acceptable for white women, and for bravely addressing her own ugly duckling syndrome.
And the tangible elements of her vibrant persona are preserved. Her iconic, psychedelically painted Porsche 356 Cabriolet, her scarves, her necklaces, they're all at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum.
This exploration, tracing the outline of the source material, it just illustrates the profound and painful paradox of Janis Joplin's life. She was a severely bullied misfit from Texas who transformed herself into the ultimate embodiment of freedom and raw power on the world stage. Yet right up to the final hours of her life, she struggled privately with rejection, addiction, and acute loneliness, evidenced by that profound disappointment she felt when both her fiancé and close friend failed to keep their appointments with her.
What we have uncovered here in great detail is the extreme fragility that was hidden behind that powerful fame. She was a woman who conquered the world's biggest stages, sold millions of albums, but the psychological conflict established in her teenage years, it never left her.
And the critical question remains one of acceptance. Did Janis Joplin ever truly manage to reconcile the ostracized high school girl with the global icon who had everything, except perhaps the simple, stable acceptance that she craved her entire life?
Thank you for joining us for this examination of these source materials.
Thanks for listening.